Good morning, everyone. This is Gary Merchant. I'm calling the chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board and calling the February 26th meeting to order at 9:35. Introductions. Again, State Representative Gary Merchant, chair of the Prescription Drug Affordability Board. Into my, I guess we'll go with Representative Edwards. You're on the Zoom there. Would you introduce yourself, please? Yes, not.
Not you.
It's not you, so. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Bob Woodward, alternate member of the board, retired faculty, UNH. Jason Ashes, Director of Health Economics at the Insurance Department, Governor's appointment.
Greg Williamson, the Executive Director of the PDAP.
Thank you. And to develop a quorum, I see you're under, so I have to make you. So promote Jason to a board member, from alternate to board member to ensure we have a quorum. Representative Edwards and I are both appointed by the speaker, so therefore I cannot elevate Dr. Woodward. So in giving that will establish a quorum with myself, Representative Edwards, and Dr. Aziz. The approval of the January 29th minutes, I believe those are still pending. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll pass that right along. All right. In regards to business of the board, goals for 2024. I'll refer to Mr. Williamson.
Yeah, that was just to briefly update everybody on some of what we're working towards, that you all have identified earlier this year. We've already met on biosimilars. Today, we'll discuss a bit more with Jane Horvath about some of the market dysfunctions and how we as a board can address those here in New Hampshire. I'll go ahead and skip to the Stakeholder Advisory Council. I've met with Representative Sherman and Representative Merchant to outline a letter that will go out to all of the individuals that were designated in the authorizing legislation. So those will start going out this week. We expect to conduct one-on-one interviews or briefings with each of those individuals, and we'll surely share who steps up or who nominates someone else. So you all will get a chance to review that. I think that's all I wanted to update. Any questions for this back over? We had the redundancy report, which we will turn to you too, but yeah.
So is there still opportunity to nominate others for the advisory board? Has that happened or? Is that
so-
for board members?
Yeah, no, in the legislation, it lists like exactly who. So it's like the governor or his designate, or
Prescriptive, I think.
it's very
Prescriptive,
prescriptive. I think there's a consumer advocate, but they've already been designated by the governors. There's an opportunity to review, but not really an opportunity to overturn. But we will end up going through a rulemaking process, and I'm sure it will be refined over time. So if that's something you all would like to be incorporated, or something for the stakeholders to think about when they're thinking about the structure of the board, it could be a board designated individual too, is something we could think about.
Can't wait to meet them.
Yeah, me too. Okay, we'll toss back over to you.
Thank you. In regards to legislative updates, there are three bills that the board was sort of following. House Bill 1605, which is dealing with the extension from 2 years to 4 years for the executive director, plus the issue of the contract review by fiscal. That was heard by the House ED&A committee. They unanimously decided to ITL it and expedite it to legislate. So that bill basically at this point in time is dead. House Bill 1225, that's Representative Edwards' bill about the conflict of interest. My understanding is it was heard by the Commerce Committee. The subcommittee's recommendation to the full committee is to interim study. Worthy of having additional merits, if you will, but they wanted more information about, and therefore it's going to go based upon their recommendation, the interim study. House Bill 1365, which is the biologic substitution, which is the bill I put before the House. It's in Commerce. Initially went to Commerce on interim study. I worked with some people on the committee to hopefully get the bill to pass. As people began to understand what it was we were doing, what we're trying to propose from it, I think we begin to understand the merits of it. So right now it's going back to a subcommittee hearing. And hope at that point in time, we will have some additional testimony to help support the bill and shepherd it through the House. So that's the update legislatively. The other thing we talked about was the issue of the budget, which I need to talk to Mr. Williamson, is going back to fiscal because the way the budget was created. We have the money, but it was kind of distributed, allocated in an odd manner. So therefore, there's things to do with in-state travel, out-state travel, and so forth that Mr. Williamson really needs to do. We need to go back to fiscal, and hopefully at that point in time, we're not trying to ask for more money. We're trying to basically reallocate it. So that's also on the agenda. And then also, Dr. As if you want to talk about the redundancy report briefly.
Okay, yeah.
Floor is yours.
Yeah, so we've provided the draft and hopefully next month or soon we'll be able to review that, and we welcome feedback from any and all members of the board. But, initially, we took this on and try to model it in a certain way because just the term redundancy in itself is a little bit nebulous, right? And so what's redundant? And so I kind of came up with a couple of definitions that I found from the official English definition, right? So it's defined as the state of no longer being useful. And so it doesn't just mean it's something else that we're already doing, but oftentimes, I mean, this is a quickly evolving industry, as we all know. So sometimes a data reporting parameter 3 years ago might not necessarily have kept up with how the industry has evolved, and therefore would fit into the definition as redundant. So I'd like all board members to keep that in mind. It's really a soft definition, redundancy. So we try to model it that way to look at arcane reporting requirements that are really no longer useful and things that are repetitive. And we've learned a lot by doing it, and I hope the board learns a lot by reading this and then can offer really salient advice and recommendations going forward. On the executive summary, I offer a statement that, that speaks of the aim of the report to identify both direct and indirect redundancies or areas where regulatory authority overlaps. So that's another part of it. So when you read that report, keep that keen eye on it to find out where are their overlapping authorities. I think one of the missives in the language for the RSA is 400A68. Ultimately asked to identify opportunities to improve efficiencies and economies in the work that we do. And I think that that's a key piece of that missive, and that's why we modeled it that way. So that's all we have now. I look forward to talking about this, and we can talk about next month the functional form in which it's best to receive feedback, and then for the insurance department to incorporate that. We want to be holistic, transparent, fair, and broad.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a hand up with Representative Edwards.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
I
Okay.
can.
All right. I'm just a little paranoid about this microphone, but so did you tell us a date upon which we can expect to have a copy of the report, the draft report?
The draft report's been submitted to the board members, to the chair and the executive director, so it's in their hands, and when I guess they deem it appropriate. I'll let the chair speak.
Yeah, Mr. Representative Edwards, that will be disseminated to the board members for their review and perusal, if you will, by Friday of this week.
By Friday of this week. So it's another 5 days.
4 days.
All right. Okay.
Probably sooner than that.
Okay. I just would like to point out that I've been looking forward to this report for 11 months, and I'm just getting very anxious about not having it when it's available. I don't like it being withheld.
It will be coming out by Friday this week, which is an additional 4 days beyond 11 months.
But if it's in the hands of the board, it should be in the hands of the members, and it's not.
It will be coming out by Friday, March 1st. So that's, I want to say, Jason, thank you for that. summary and so forth. It was very helpful to frame it. So when people receive the report, which is back to the same thing, having discussion, so they understand when they're going through the report, how to frame it. I think that's, your narrative is very, very helpful for us to understand that.
Thank you. Thank you for your opportunity.
So I do have another question to the chair.
Sure.
Would you please explain to us why that you have a copy of the report and you cannot just send it to the members of the board? What is the rationale for you choosing to delay distribution of the report?
To avoid exactly what we're doing right now, getting into a discussion before the commissioner from the insurance department's here to talk about that report with us collectively.
That would be easy to handle, to just say we're not going to discuss it, but here's a copy so you can read it. I don't like having information withheld. If we're supposed to be about transparency, let's be transparent and share the information. That's it.
Okay, thank you, sir. In regards to the other issue, we have a press release going out sometime this week also to announce the arrival of Mr. Williamson as our executive director, so that'll be forthcoming. So be on the lookout for that. I'm trying to get it out to the public and to members as well to let them know that we actually have an executive director now. So I want to say thank you for being on board. In regards to the other thing, I believe at this point in time, is there anything else on the agenda somebody else wants to talk before I get into the presentation this morning? You all set? Dr. Sherman, you all set?
He's muted.
He's muted, okay. Well, I'll let you introduce your
Sure.
speaker, please.
Sure.
Hold on.
Oh,
Oh,
are you all set, Dr. Sherman?
Yes, I'm going to have to, I'm in Montana, so I'll have to drop off shortly, but I thought I would check in just to see if you needed me for the remainder of the meeting, if I can stay on, but I'll have to drop in and come back if that's the case.
That's fine. I think the presentation that we're about to hear may be advantageous if you have the opportunity to stay on. If not, we totally understand.
Okay, thanks.
all right. All right. Thank you, Dr. Sherman. And Representative Edwards, we do intend to have Commissioner Betancourt at our next meeting so that he can discuss the redundancy report with all of you and to provide an overview. So we've been working to set that up with the office and we're excited for that discussion. So we're going to turn now to our expert speaker, Jane Horvath. We have a wonderful presentation for you all today that I hope will help you all begin coalescing around a guiding mission and vision to inform our work together. You all know, or at least you've heard about the complexity of the pharmaceutical supply chain, and it's very easy to get lost or to focus myopically on just one individual actor. But the reason we're here today is really to figure out solutions that can cut through the market shenanigans and improve affordability and access of prescription drugs in the Granite State. So we're really lucky to have Jane Horvath here today as our expert speaker. She will level set with the group about the pharmaceutical supply chain market failures and how we as a board can start thinking about meaningful approaches to lower the cost of patients, taxpayers, and employers. Just very briefly, Jane Horvath is an experienced health policy analyst and policymaker with an extensive background in both the public and private sector. A few of her notable career highlights: she helped to negotiate the creation of the Medicaid drug rebate program in her capacity representing the nation's Medicaid directors. She created the Federal Vaccines for Children program while on staff at the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, and she collaborated with state leaders and drug pricing experts to develop the PDAB, or Prescription Drug Affordability Board Model Act, while at NASHP, which is the National Academy for State Health Policy. Today, Jane advises state governments, foundations, private and public sector payers and providers and consumer organizations on drug pricing issues. And she regularly testifies on drug pricing issues, both at the federal and state level, and we're honored to have her with us today. So Jane, I'll turn it over to you, and everyone, this is designed to be an interactive discussion between you all and Jane, so please feel free to jump in.
Questions?
Yeah, I think Jane, are you open to questions throughout the presentation, or would you like?
Absolutely. I think that's actually pretty important. because it's a pretty complicated subject, and I think we need to get the questions on the table while they're hot. So absolutely. And Kirk, if I could ask you to help me sort of moderate that.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm just not that talented to watch the chat and do the presentation. So if you could help me.
You
So
got
I
it.
can share my screen, is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
Okay. The other thing I just wanted to let everybody know is that I approach things as policy. I always have. My career at the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, it has historically been a very bipartisan committee, which also just reflects what I do, policy and not politics. And I have a lot of respect for the industry. I worked for Merck for a decade, and when I left Merck, I did another 3 years of consulting with other companies in the biopharmaceutical sector. So just by way of sort of my background and my perspective, and I try to solve problems, basically. So let's see. Can everybody see that?
We
Yes.
can see it.
Great.
Although you're sharing the whole PowerPoint, not the presentation. There you go.
Thank you.
Right.
There you go. Yep, it just takes me a little minute. So anyway, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I really appreciate it. And again, we'll take questions as we go along. So, and this is a very holistic presentation about the whole market segment and how that fits into the work of the New Hampshire PDAB. I can't absolutely say, but I hope it's helpful to you in your work. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because we could probably spend about 8 hours on it. But this is sort of my view of how we got to where we are. It is an environment that I think it's accurate to say was created by the industry to allow them to basically work in an environment of unfettered ability to price. And it has started with, going back now a couple decades, but a manufacturing movement to small population diseases. So the rare diseases, the orphan diseases, things that affect fewer than 200,000 people in the US. And I think we'll talk later about it, but there's a lot of federal financial incentives to move in this direction, which are all great. But the industry has sort of managed to capitalize on that in ways that I don't think were anticipated by federal policy makers. The other problem we have is that in reaction to prices growing as they have over the last 2 decades, many entities now make a good chunk of change off of a drug price. And there's whole parts of the market that are highly incentivized and appreciate high prices as opposed to low prices, because as a percentage of price, they make more money. So that, when you're trying to line up people in support of change, that line's pretty short and it makes it very problematic. And then also the other thing that has happened over really the last 2 decades is a focus of drug corporations on Wall Street, and a focus on shareholder value and stock price, basically. And Wall Street doesn't appreciate low prices. They punish companies for that. And CEO compensation, as we'll see later, is really based on stock price. So that's just a very incentives are not always aligned, shall we say, in the marketplace between consumers and Wall Street. And price increases.
Oh, Jane, I just want to point out we have 2 questions, if you don't mind.
Can you just do that for me? Can you just stop me and tell me? Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We'll turn first to Representative Edwards. You raised your hand, Representative.
Yeah, two quick questions. Under the bubble on many entities profit, do you include in that like the PBMs and
Yes.
hospital-based pharmacies?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
your use of the word unlimited is
Yes.
just distracts me, because I don't think it's possible to have unlimited pricing potential. Do you literally want to stand behind the term unlimited?
I think when it comes to orphan drugs, yes, I would.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then now Dr. Woodward, sorry. Yeah. Goodness.
Thank you very much. I'm very much appreciative of your concern on incentives, but I have to weigh in with Representative Edwards on the unlimited. Rather than talking about unlimited, I think you're essentially focusing on what economists like to talk about as demand inelasticity and the ability to create monopoly pricing as opposed to really unlimited. You know, at some price, nobody is going to buy. We're pushing that kind of information. I am concerned about the lack of competition in many of these markets and the resulting ability to monopoly price, which makes the monopoly profits unnecessary for sustaining the product itself.
So I take your point, sir. Two things I would just say. So this is, you know, my presentation is meant for sort of a lay audience. And I myself, I'm not an economist, but so to stress the point, and I would say that with respect to orphan drugs, we have one now that just came to market at $4 million a treatment. I think we're getting pretty close to unlimited. When you create, every manufacturer strives for every product to have a monopoly position in the market, absolutely. And when we're getting to $4 million a pop, that's a lot of money. So I totally take your point, but if you could just take mine that this is just sort of meant for a lay audience and trying to communicate some information in a quick manner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. And Representative Edwards, you just raised your hand again. Would you like to raise a question?
I did. I'm just still looking at the bubbles, and pricing is a way that businesses compensate for their costs. And
Yes.
I don't see a bubble related to the increasing costs of producing the drugs to begin with. If the costs were going down, it would be easier to reduce pricing. And things like government regulation, I think, contribute pretty significantly to the cost of manufacturing. With your background in Merck, I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Certainly, and I appreciate the question. So, and Kirk, I can send you this report that I just finished in December, looking at the efficiencies that are created in the manufacturing process itself. So clinical trials are far more efficient than they used to be. Production of biologics, which is where the industry is going, is always been complicated, but there are efficiencies in that space as well. And the FDA approval, particularly for orphan drugs, breakthrough drugs, there are all these categories created by Congress for, you know, real legit and important policy reasons, but they have, you know, attenuated the whole R&D process for manufacturers, and the actual number on a percentage basis of drugs that get approved by FDA is higher now than it ever was. And for orphan drugs, I think it's like 22% of drugs. So I would argue that the costs really aren't going up; they're going down.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else before we move on? Okay, all right, back to you, Jane. Thank you.
Okie dokes. So the I'm gonna, because as I said, we could spend hours on this. So the one thing I want to get down here to, well, a couple other things, but the manufacturer price increasing benefits competitors. So if you are a pharmaceutical manufacturer, you're sort of first in class, you brought a great product out to market, and you know that there's someone behind you that's going to be bringing a product to market, say in 18 months, that's going to compete with yours, you're probably going to do as many price increases as you can before that competition hits the street. And that competition is thinking, that is great, because I get to launch my product at a much higher price than I would have otherwise had the first in class company not been raising their prices. So price increases really do benefit each other. And if I watched for a series of years, HIV products, the first manufacturer out of the box in January would announce their price increase of say 7%. And then everybody else with a therapeutically similar product would launch, announce their price increases, maybe not at 7%, but 6.7 or 7.1. Everybody shadow prices each other in the market. They don't really compete on price in the market, which is interesting. They compete on rebates and other things that are opaque. And then there's patent thickets. I'll show you a slide later, but companies have become very expert in creating monopolies for their products. And in large part, they do that by returning again and again to get patents for what you would call sort of incremental modifications, I think, as opposed to, really substantial innovation on the same product. And then pharma lobbying power is probably the best in the private sector. They put a lot of money toward it, and they hire really good people, and they have a great deal of lobby prowess, which obviously directs a lot of policy. And patient treatment advocacy, that's become a growing portion of pharma companies' public influencing portfolio spend. They direct a lot of money toward patient advocacy organizations, disease-based and other kind of based patient advocacy. And a lot of times policymakers don't really realize when they're talking to patient groups that, they're heavily, if not predominantly, funded by the pharma sector. So, and do represent sort of more of pharma's thinking than, say, a generalized consumer perspective. And then this whole constellation of factors makes it very hard for insurers to control costs. It just does. And a lot of things then as a result, because they can't really control costs very well, because these rare and small population diseases are clinically extremely important things. And so you can't deny services, you can't deny a breakthrough product to a population who hasn't had a treatment option ever, or no innovation in the last 20 years or so. So it's just harder and harder for insurers to manage these costs, which has a whole set of problematic outcomes for patients, shall we say. Ready to move on? Yeah.
I think we're good.
So, and I'm sure you folks all know this, but it's probably worth restating, but governments carry a lot of pharmaceutical costs through Medicaid, government employees, government retirees. Most states operate their own sort of Medicare Part D plans, corrections, jails, public health, higher education. Anyway, in some states, it can be 25% or more. I don't think that that's the case in New Hampshire, but it can be that high. So in terms of thinking about how states can assist in helping consumers and state budgets with pharmaceutical spending and costs, I would argue for rate setting. Basically, it's the thing that I can think of that's within the state power to do. And it can help sort of reset the terms of competition in a state. It can improve, it should be designed to improve market function, basically. And how you get to rate setting is because there's so many things that states cannot otherwise do, but state level healthcare rate setting is squarely within government authority to do, because you can't regulate manufacturer and national prices. You can't regulate Medicare Part D plans. You can't affect ERISA plan covered benefits and services, but there are things that states can do vis-a-vis ERISA plans, just not benefit and services. And then you need to also keep in mind that the multi-source generic market operates very differently from the branded patented markets. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the use of the term reference pricing, while in some contexts that is like a fine term to use, but in general, it's sort of a red flag for dormant commerce clause problems. And so I would always urge state policymakers to whatever policy that you're developing, really think about whether you're reference pricing or not.
Jane, can we jump in with a question?
Sure.
All right, Representative Merchant.
Thank you for taking the question. In regards to the multi-source generic market, it does operate different than a brand name. Have you any thoughts on taking the same methodology with generics and bringing it over to the biosimilars? What I'm trying to get to is that instead of us trying to regulate the price on a particular generic product, we create something called a maximum allowable cost or reimbursement for a particular product, bringing that concept over to the biologics and saying, in a class of biosimilars, Humira is a classic one, is many products coming to the market now that are biosimilars, is creating a maximum allowable cost concept with the biosimilar market when you have multiple biosimilars with the same product.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And yes, I think you can do that. I think that there's maybe another problem, a step ahead or behind what you have just laid out that PDABs might want to look at, which is the inability of biosimilars to get really a toehold in the market. And that has to do with it's called the reference product, the product on which all the biosimilars are based. Like Humira is out there, it's an autoimmune treatment, and it is now finally, after 23 years of patent protection, gone off patent. And there are now about 4 or 5 biosimilars in the market. But what the manufacturer of Humira has done is, I mean, their sales are going to be in the tank anyway, because that's just how the market should work. But what they have done now is offer PBMs, I'll call it extreme rebating, basically, so that the net cost to a PBM or an insurer of Humira is, I don't know, dollars as opposed to tens of thousands of dollars. And the biosimilars can't compete with that kind of rebating, basically. And so the biosimilars really haven't been getting any uptake because of the action of the reference product. And again, the reference product is otherwise, gonna fade from view. So they can be very dramatic in their strategies for just wringing out the last bit of profit that they can from the market for the product Humira that is, lost patent protection. But I mean, God knows how long they can continue to do what they're doing, but they're really making it hard for the biosimilars to earn profits, basically. It's kind of a very threatening situation if you're a biosimilar manufacturer and you had expectations of a certain level of market uptake and profit. So that's the thing I think that needs to get solved first. And I do think setting sort of upper payment limits across a whole class, which is really what you're talking about here, but thinking about solving for that market dysfunction first. Does that help?
It helps. So if I follow the upper payment limit, are we talking about a payment limit per biosimilar or per whole class?
For the whole class. For the whole class, because you have to sort of wrap the reference in there. Because bringing down like the whatever the cost of the Humira relative to the biosimilars, so that the margin on the rebate is smaller. Like there's less ability to game as the Humira manufacturer is doing. We can talk more about that. I mean, these are sort of like poke your eyes out kind of strategies here in terms of complexity. But just to put a pin in it, if you will, like, and we can come back. Is that right?
That's fine. Thank you.
All right.
So, yeah, I'm sorry?
I think we're good.
Okay. So this not really related to the header that I just had before it, I apologize, but this is for you to look at later. It really, the terminology and who pays, who bills, what's it called when they do that, that's what this is. It just sort of shows sort of, first off, how the product, in the first half of this, how the product flows through to the patient, basically, and then what those transactions are basically called, and how the money stacks up, basically the wholesale acquisition cost. And anyway, and then the other really important point here that I would make is that the insurer's PBM and the insurer are technically, in my view, not part of the supply chain. A supplier is someone who purchases a product, owns the product, and resells the product. A PBM never owns a product unless they run a mail order operation, but that's sort of not the problematic part of their business when we're thinking about misaligned incentives.
We have a question for you, Jane, from Representative Edwards. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. So as I'm looking at this slide, I'm looking to see where the hospital pharmacies are in this. Are they meant to be put into the same box as the insurance PBM, or was this water flow designed to say something specific?
So I would put the hospital pharmacy in the third block down, the hospital doctor pharmacy. They sort of, I mean, there's differences between them, of course, but they sort of occupy the same.
But if it goes through a hospital pharmacy, it never hits the PBM, does it?
Sure, because they're going to bill the insurer. So it depends if it's inpatient or outpatient. So yes, you're right. If it's an inpatient thing, it doesn't hit the PBM. But hospitals have outpatient pharmacies, and in that context, they do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We have another question.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, Bob Woodward, thank you very much. It seems to me that this slide basically doesn't provide a framework for us to understand the acquisitions that have occurred in the market. You've got patient kind of in the middle here, but the insurer's PBM can be related now with the wholesaler.
Yes.
The insurer and the insured PBM can be the same.
Yes.
And back on this kick of what's happening is the successful effort by the pharmaceutical industry and the supply chain to use acquisitions to create monopolies, which allow them to create monopoly pricing. And
Yes.
it seems to me that dynamic is kind of central to one of the things that concerns us. And I'm looking for ways to understand that graphically.
We're getting there.
This slide, yeah, okay, thank you.
This ain't that, but we're getting there. Okay. So thank you. I very much appreciate the knowledge that you all have here. This is great. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I have a long slideshow here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this either. But I did want you to know, and I think New Hampshire, you have PBM laws yourselves, but states have been trying to tackle this PBM question since going back to 2014, or the earliest laws that I could find. And the PBM issue has come to state policymaker attentions really because of the impact that they have had on state independent pharmacies. Independent pharmacies have sort of become, in my view, the collateral damage in the struggle between these vertically integrated entities that were just mentioned, where PBMs are affiliated with the CVS or Walgreens. The national PBMs are affiliated corporately with national chain pharmacies, and they, conduct their market wars trying to undermine each other in terms of pharmacy reimbursement. It's actually, watching the trade press sometimes is very entertaining, watching these fights. But independents are collateral damage because these are boilerplate contracts. They don't take into account that an independent pharmacy simply can't buy at the volume that CVS can. So, and the one thing I would point out is, well, two things. One is states are still at it because the business model is iterating all the time, trying to get around these laws. What they can't sue to overturn, then they change their business model, and everybody has to go back to amend their laws. And the other thing I was going to say is that Express Scripts last year finally realized the damage that they were doing to independent pharmacies, particularly in rural areas where, you know, chains don't go. And so they have now created a whole sort of set of policies to treat independents differently, to preserve independent pharmacies. So I guess I would say if Express Scripts has noticed, there really is a problem here. So, and states have been after this for a very long time, precisely because of independent pharmacies really just getting caught in the crossfire. So here's your slide.
Yeah.
This is it. I don't even know what we can say about this other than, So, and this is really our problem. And the interesting thing is, finally, the Federal Trade Commission decided in 2023 to start looking at it, at this, what's going on here. I think in part because of community pharmacists, like the FTC declined to look at PBM market behavior like 2 years prior, despite a lot of people saying you got to look at this. And finally, last year, they decided there was enough information presented to them. And I think Kirk actually had something to do with that when he was at the Arnold Ventures. But anyway, so they are looking at it now, and hopefully they will come to some analysis that is going to help us all have a better functioning market, because what's arising out of this market is, and I can send Kirk some material if you'd like to see it, just really scary from a patient perspective.
And Jane, we had another question from Representative Edwards pop up. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. Just a quick one. To understand this slide, each of these stovepipes compete with the other stovepipes, do they not? Or
Yes.
is there a sort okay. So these are all competitors.
Yes.
Okay.
The stovepipes compete, and then vertically across, they also, you know, they compete in a lot of different ways. Yes.
Okay. So there's a lot of competition here relative to some other industries. It seems to me, but
yes. But you know, so the thing about this, you're right. There is a lot of competition, but again, with the incentives, it's not consumer friendly competition. And so there is an example. It was CVS actually, and honestly, I apologize, I forget if it was 1 year or 2 years ago. There was a whistleblower, and it had to do with the Medicare Part D program. And so basically, CVS had signed an agreement with a manufacturer for rebates, volume-based rebates, on the extent to which, as Caremark, their PBM, could drive volume on behalf of the manufacturer to the product using their formulary design for all sorts of employer plans and stuff. And then they thought, you know, we have our own Medicare Part D program. And so we can use our retail pharmacies to drive volume. And pharmacies typically are not able to drive volume, right? Except maybe on generics, interchangeable generics, but they don't typically tell you, they don't carry Enbrel, they only carry Humira. They don't do that. What drives volume generally is the doctor writing the prescription. So in this case, Caremark decided that they would tell the Medicare Part D people in their plans that the retail store didn't carry the product. They didn't carry the generic. It wasn't available. And so, I mean, that's terrible. That whole thing is still ongoing, but that's the kind of misaligned incentives and the kind of competition that we don't need. I agree with you. Otherwise, this would look, you know, I would have thought when this was all starting a number of years ago, I thought, okay, you know, within each stovepipe, everybody's going to be oriented toward the best patient outcomes, because we generally understand that the best patient outcomes are the things that reduced healthcare spending. But that's not how it's played out.
Thank you.
Jane, we have two more questions.
Sure.
Thank you again. One of the things that I'm not sure there's an answer to this, but I'll ask anyways. In regards to the medical loss ratio, which I believe is something through the Accountable Care Act, that insurance companies have to utilize a certain percentage of their premiums towards patient care, depending upon the size, could be 80–85%. What I don't know is that if you have a corporation, a corporate umbrella, if you will, which has different components to it, if the money is being made in the PBM side, or money is being made in the laboratory side, money is being made, if you will, in the physician practices that they own, is that calculated into the medical loss ratio, or is that outside of it?
So, I mean, I don't know. My guess is that, the top line, the insurer, that they are sort of separate corporate entities, and then that's where the MLR calculation happens. And it's the above, the top of the stovepipe that gets the benefit from all of these misaligned incentives in specific. But I have to say, I really don't know. I can check it out, but I may be wrong here.
If you don't mind, or point me to somebody who could help, because what I'm concerned about is as we go through the stovepipes, the vertical integration, that it's a way for the insurance company to work outside of the medical loss ratio, which is sort of to cap it.
Right.
And that could be an incentive for them, again, misalignment, to acquire physician practices, laboratories, pharmacies, and so forth. And I don't have an answer, but if you have somebody I could talk with about this, I'd be more than glad to get their contact.
Certainly. I will.
Quick question, my background, Express Scripts, if I recall correctly, started out as a not-for-profit organization and then converted to a for-profit stance. It seems, is that true?
Actually, I don't know about Express Scripts. United Healthcare is based in Minnesota, and Minnesota doesn't allow, or at least didn't allow, non-for-profit insurance. So they operated everywhere in the country on a for-profit basis, and I believe still operate on a nonprofit basis in Minnesota. But I'm not aware of Express Scripts.
Yeah, I'll try to look that up. One of the issues is that it seems to me that competition among for-profit industries is very much different than competition among not-for-profit. That is, the incentives for a PBM on a for-profit are to keep the rebates. The incentives for a PBM that's a not-for-profit would be to compete with, saying that they can provide drugs at a lower price to the consumers, and not trying to skim off any of the sort of ability to manipulate the markets, create profits themselves. This question of we have allowed our PBMs to become and to compete for the highest profits. It's not the competition that I would interpret Representative Edwards as seen in this chart. Thank you.
All right, Jane, I think we can keep going.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is, another slide about really what we have been talking about now for a bit. And yeah, it's the whole thing is moving very, very quickly. And there, as you have noted, a lot of conflict of interest in, running in several different directions through the stovepipe and across. So I think, Kirk, okay if we move on? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So this, I think, is always interesting to show people, when we think about manufacturers and pricing, where there is indeed a problem, I would say. But when you look at the rank of manufacturers in the Fortune 100, relative to the rank of wholesalers, which is a very, very concentrated industry, corporately concentrated, and relative to the stuff that we've just been discussing, PBM, pharmacy, insurer. Yeah, manufacturers are bringing up the rear here, which, and again, my perspective on this is that this really did start with, sort of pricing getting to be of great concern in many sectors, many aspects of the healthcare system. And what we're seeing over here now is the response to all of that. And, we just have a lot of misaligned incentives and a lot of anti-consumer behavior now as a result.
Okay, Jane, we have another question from Representative Edwards.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the two columns to the right, wholesalers and the one on the far right,
Mm-hmm.
these companies do more than move drugs, right? I mean, they
Yes.
like McKesson is a huge IT company as well, and so are you basically using this slide to imply that their position in the pharma industry is what's driving their sales?
Yes, I am. And you think that's not correct?
I would have to look at each of them, but for example, CVS, they sell a lot of stuff. When I go into a CVS, there are a lot of things going on in that store that don't have anything to do with the pharmacy in the back. But so I just wanted to understand your slide, because it seems to imply in the context of your presentation that they're doing well from a revenue perspective because of their place in the pharma industry as opposed to being diversified companies.
Yes, that is the point I'm making. And like when I think of McKesson, yes, they do IT stuff, but they also now do a lot of contracting. They do backroom services for, use your words, Jane, for independent pharmacies. They negotiate with PBMs on the part of unaffiliated pharmacies. They handle billing, contracting, all sorts of bookkeeping. I believe it's McKesson, runs the Vaccine First Children's program for the federal government. They have a lot of diversified business, but most of it really does focus around prescription drugs, basically.
Thank you.
And like these over here, this third column is really those stovepipes that we're talking about. I mean, I think that that's what drives revenue more probably than the non-pharmacy, the front end of the pharmacy. That's my sense of it anyway. I could be very wrong.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Representative Merchant.
Thank you. Recently, Lilly announced that one of their products, it's not direct to consumer per se, but I understand that they're really utilizing a pharmacy. So instead of going through distribution through McKesson and Amerisource and going through a PBM and going through the insurance to a certain degree, that they're looking to actually bypass all of that.
Yep.
Connect themselves directly almost to the patient. Do you foresee that as being something that's evolving or something that's relatively unique for a particular drug?
So we're getting to this later, which is
Okay.
sort of all this market disruption. And yeah, I think employers, I think everybody's really upset with how the market functions these days. The market doesn't function well for manufacturers anymore. Arguably, it's a system they created, but it's like out of their control. So yes, but we're going to get to that.
Okay, thank you.
Other
All right,
questions?
go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So this is something I was raising at the beginning, and I do think that this is like our number one issue here in terms of trying to address cost, because cost and price lead to sort of all this other dysfunction that we've been seeing here. So, but here's and Kirk, I can send you this report that I did in December, really analyzing this whole market segment of the industry. So, but and we can talk a lot more in detail, but the point of this slide is to show you that federal policy is designed to incentivize rare disease drug development, because people have thought, well, if you develop a drug for only 200,000 people, what kind of market is that? Like, nobody's going to make any money off of that, which is true, in the way that it used to be thought of. So there's all of these FDA policies that Congress has put in place. Orphan status never ends, which is, you know, a very significant policy, that orphan status never ends. And you get orphan exclusivity in addition to patent protection. And you can keep going back and adding orphan designations to your product, just like you can keep going back and getting more patents on your same product. So you can really build yourself quite a very rock solid monopoly and elbow out a lot of competition for a very long time. And you can price like your product only treats 200,000 people, when in fact it is the #1 selling drug in the world. So that's distilled, I think, the issue that we have now with rare disease, the benefits. And you also, stuff that's not even, oh, I do have it on the slide. You get clinical trial assistance, all sorts of things. So, and I will send you that report, Kirk, that you can share with the group.
Great, and we have a question from Dr. Woodward.
Yeah, hi. So have there been legislative efforts to terminate the orphan drug status? If
No.
indeed it
No.
goes beyond some number of, either dollar sales or people served, or, any kind of sort of rational criteria?
No, sir. Because I think there really hasn't been much work done on this to explore really what's going on here, rather than what the industry tries to tell us. And, the industry insists that this is a fragile market, a high risk market, very scary, nobody should get into it kind of thing. But again, this report even just looks at the venture capital involved in this, and the number of small companies, really small companies with a ton of venture capital, are actually now taking their drugs, because it is so safe, all the way through to market, which never used to happen because it was too risky. So no, and alarmingly, I just realized Friday that the U.S. Energy and Commerce Committee is having its Rare Disease Day on March 1st, and they're having a hearing. And one of the bills up for discussion during that hearing is a bill that would exempt all orphan drugs from Medicare negotiation, which, to the best of my thinking, is most of the drugs. When you look at, again, this report, you'll see that the pipeline is all rare disease drugs all the time. So, yeah. So no, I think it's actually going in the other direction. Again, in part because of the pharmaceutical industry funding these patient groups. The cystic fibrosis patient group is particularly vocal, and Vertex is the company with the best, really the best drugs and the best selling drugs and the most costly cystic fibrosis drugs. And they really are out there all the time, talking about threats of cost containment to cystic fibrosis treatments. Even though their drug, Trikafta, as it says here, is the 3rd highest revenue drug in the world. And it is only used for cystic fibrosis, and only in wealthy countries. So, I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of people, not millions of people. So, their status as 3rd in the world is based on price and nothing else. So, and this, again, is to look at your leisure. This organization, you may want to hear from them too. They do stellar work, IMAC. They started internationally working on drug access and patents in 3rd world countries and things like that. And they've been working in the US now for probably like 2017, I want to say 2016, something like that. So, and they do really great work, and they have very sensible ideas about patent law and changes that maybe should happen. But this is why when you look at the last 2 columns about like the US relative to Europe and relative to Japan, the number of patents that we hand out here for these products relative to other countries, I think goes a long way to explain some of our cost problem.
And Jane, could you expand a little bit more on the point about how the percentage of those patents filed after FDA approval? And what does that mean for monopolistic pricing or delays or facilitation of competition?
It means everything. It means everything. So when you come to market, you've worked on your molecule, you've patented your molecule itself, right? And then possibly the mechanism of action. And you only do what you need to do to protect your product and get to market. And then after that, you can just keep going back and making incremental changes to your product to keep extending your patent life to basically bar all competition. And that's what it means, really, because if you just came to market with your patents and didn't go back over and over and over again, your patent would last 7 to 10 years on the market, and then you would have competition in generic competition or biosimilar competition. But this way, you don't have, in the case of Humira, once they were on market, it was like 22, 23 years. And we're only now, and that product came to market in like 2000. So it is everything. And it really is, it's the playbook for the industry. Between this and orphan drugs, it really is the playbook. They're very successful.
Thank you, Jane. And Dr. Woodward, I think you had a question.
The column following, the duration of patent protection, that's measured in years or months?
Yes, years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's alarming.
So that's not one patent, that's a sequence of patents.
Right, that's the 30, for instance, for Xarelto, it's 32 patents, duration of patent protection, 33.5 years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Jane, Todd Fahey, good to see you. How are you?
Hi, good.
I think, Jane, you and I have met in a prior life, right? Pretty sure.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, well, we
Actually,
don't.
my screen is such, I can't see anybody right now.
It's okay. So a couple things, I hear all this, I do, but given the sophistication of the industry, you'd assume that when they do their numbers, they're assuming it's not going to be a 7 to 10 year rollout, or 7 to 10 year run out. They're probably going to figure out, based upon their investment, that they're going to have in excess of 30 years in some cases, right? Would you agree to that? So,
I think now,
pardon
yes.
me?
I think that's true now. I think 30 years ago, that was absolutely not the expectation at all.
So then I try to think about this a little bit, and with no disrespect to anybody in government, but you can see it. We see it in many places. You see the teams that you can assemble, and you think about, just think about like a sporting event. Like think about the U.S. women's soccer team, and they're playing the bottom ranked person, and they crush them 23-1 because they just have so much more talent. Now that may be changing. That's a different discussion, but like, I think one of the last round, I don't know who they played, maybe it was South Korea or somebody. It was like 23-1, and is that the kind of thing we're seeing here? Is that that the regulators and these folks, and when you use the term handing out patents, it just suggests that, it's like it's not even evenly matched, and they're giving them they're giving these patents to these groups that are well resourced.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
I would agree with that. And also, you can also object to a patent, but I don't have the knowledge to object to a patent. Do you know what I mean? Like it's all heavy duty science. So, and I am not a scientist. So there is a process. You just have to be educated enough to do that. But you're right. They got the A team. The industry has the A team. Yeah.
So, so the last thing I'd say is, like, one of our charges is to, and it is really my hope, and it is my belief we will do this, is that our job, it seems to me, among other things, is to suggest strategies, to make it clear what's happening. Because in this group, you have a lot of people with particular expertise. And I think I don't know that this is in the usual discussion for people. I mean, if people are ill, they're not worried about vertical integration. You know,
That's
if you got a 56-year-old or 57-year-old person who suddenly learns that their blood is stickier than it should be, and they're surely hoping for clinical trials that are gonna let them walk their kids down the aisle. They're not focused on all these types of nuances that you're talking about, right?
Right.
I-
Yes, that's
a
exactly right.
comment, I guess. More of a comment than a question. But thank you.
That's why I do what I do. Because this is really complicated stuff and you know, it's hard to, you need to understand the whole picture. And that, you know, it starts with pricing, but it's not just about pricing. Like if you're gonna work on pricing and costs, you have to figure out like the whole thing to be effective and you know what I mean? Like there's,
Yeah.
you can't just dump blame in one place at this
The
point.
last thing I'd say is that you're not going to do this and build these factories and invest in R&D and some of the brightest minds to make, you know, to make a pittance of a return, Jane, in fairness, right? So the question is, what is a fair return? And again, before, you know, Representative Edwards loses his mind and calls me out on it, I'm not suggesting, Representative, that we're talking about price control. We're not. But I think in the context of this discussion, you know, if I'm going to invest all that money, I'm going to want to see a return. So, you know, that is not our job to talk about what a reasonable return is. But I think in the context as we consider it, I think we're wise to think about there has to be such a return. And then the last thing is, doesn't surprise me that the venture capital money is going here because they're looking for places to invest, right? And given the rates of return, if you're gonna spread your venture capital funding over 100 different ventures and you have a chance of making 5,000%, of course you're gonna do it. I do it in a second. So just put that out there. Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Dr. Aziz.
Thank you, Jane. This is so informative, so I'm thankful to be learning from you this way. So it's my understanding that the US drug to market process is very unique in the world. And I saw a lot of comparisons in that last IMAX slide to other nations, European nations and Japan, who have a highly socialized healthcare system. It was my understanding that, you know, it's very favorable in the US that we rely on essentially revenue generating capacity to accelerate the drug to market innovation process. Does IMAC have any output on that to maybe like in the context of that last slide to indicate what the nation of the initial approval was or the initial patents were? I think that slide maybe misleads the reader to think that these other nations have a much more liberal patent process, and that's an advantage. But where were those drugs released and innovated? We see, I was just in Boston this weekend, and there are pharmaceutical companies and skyscrapers going up everywhere. It feels like the US has a very business-friendly environment for drug innovation. And I think that's an important thing because we talk about these drugs, you know, people waiting for cures for these diseases, and capitalism seems to drive that innovation. And I'd like to see elements of that in that last slide, because I could tell a compelling story that could inform the board. What say you of that part? And what nation was the most innovation endured?
So the only thing I can tell you is that companies have been and continue to build research and manufacturing facilities around the world. I mean, it just is economic efficiency. So, and they don't consider whether there are cost controls, cost containment in those countries. They do it because the math works. So, and the other thing to know is that companies launch in the US first because they can get the very highest price, which then impacts the extent to which somebody's going to knock down their price in France. You know, and they want, and for countries that do reference pricing, they want the US, the highest price out here in the US to go into any other country's calculations. So that, you know, when we say we get the drugs the fastest here, if some other country did what we did, they would be the fastest, if they, because of the role in pricing, basically. So, it's less about the speed of market entry and all of that. It's because they really want to be here first. And the other thing I'll say is that in Canada, right, so they have these cost containment strategies, laws in place about a drug when it comes to market, and like it can't exceed this upper payment limit, if you will. But that happened, I believe, in the 70s. And what it was basically a quid pro quo. The industry wanted more intellectual property protections than they felt that the Canadian law was insufficient. And so in exchange, the government said, well, okay, we can do that, but we are not going to allow just sort of unlimited pricing with all this IP and patent protection. And so that's when you got the Patented Medicines Review Board and stronger IP protections. So we don't quite have that balance here. And I will say also Japan and many countries in Europe also have orphan drug incentives going on too. We're not unique in that sense either.
Oh, yeah, Merchant.
In talking about the US compared to the rest of the world, can you, or should we speak about the issue of the PBM market and the distribution system we have here in the United States compared to other countries like in Canada, for instance, or even going into France, England, and so forth? Are PBMs common in other countries throughout the world?
No, they are not. Although private insurance is sort of creeping in. I just have to grab a tissue. Private insurance is creeping in Europe, in particular, sort of a wraparound public insurance. And PBMs may not be far behind, but no, they are not. They are not prevalent.
Okay, I think we can keep going.
Okie dokes. So this is also just to say that, there have been companies who wanted to come to market with a lower priced product, basically undercut the competition, which is, what we all sort of think about market competition. And the, PBMs don't like it. PBMs reject that stuff altogether, again, because they make more money off of higher priced drugs. And so does Wall Street. And these are just some examples that, over the past couple of years I've seen in the headlines, and I'm thinking, oh, but Wall Street is not favorable to lower priced products. And you can just see how with Gilead and Moderna, how Wall Street responds to things. So, and then this last part is that C-suite compensation in the industry is, very, very heavily weighted toward stock price. And there's more C-suite compensation than there is actually R&D going on in some of these companies. So again, there's a lot going on in this arena that is creating all the problems we have, which is really just the point of this. It's like there's a lot of externalities on the industry that cause them to, all pieces of this industry that cause them to act like they do. Market
We have another
disruptors.
question.
Just one little question. It's Todd Fahey again, Jane.
Hi.
Hi. I mean, we have a lot of challenges and headwinds in the country, right? Isn't this a reflection of just some of them? I mean, when you look at executive compensation, and I grant you it's shocking. I'm simply doing the math of how many people are in the C-suite multiplied by 10. And it's a simple equation. It's a lot of money, right?
Right.
But it's a reflection of other things, and it's a collection of choices we're all making about what we're going to agree to. I mean, relative to all kinds of things, like how much we're going to play for sporting tickets and how much athletes are getting paid. I mean, do we have to think a little bit? Should we be thinking about context, all context in the US, not just drug context?
I'm not qualified to answer that one, honestly. I mean, I think my opinion on that doesn't matter very much.
Okay.
You know. I do think, though, that with respect to pharmaceuticals, you know, I think public policy can modify Wall Street's expectations of the kind of profit taking that can occur in this space, which, you know, sort of adjusting the levers a little bit, upper payment limits being one of them, but the industry, it's going to be it would take a lot of really heavy duty policy to change the profitability equation of the pharmaceutical industry. You know, so I think the industry can still remain highly profitable, but people could afford their medicines. So like there's a sweet spot there that we're missing right now. So, but onto market disruptors, which gets back to the question we had earlier today. There's a lot going on, I'm really happy to say. The first here is the Medicare negotiation, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is, you know, basically the feds have identified now so far 10 drugs for the first round of negotiation these are the highest spend drugs in Medicare Part D right now, so retail products. And the focus, interestingly, the focus of the federal effort by law is drugs that have had extended monopoly position, extended patent protection, and have no market competition. So it's very specific, basically. And then there's a couple other exemptions here too, but they're going to be using net market prices as a key part of their, their ceiling price, their maximum fair price negotiations. It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out and really how deep they go. And the really important thing about this is this negotiated price, this maximum fair price, it's called, is going to be a public number. And so other health plans, other purchasers are going to be able to see this number, which transparency is pretty important to sort of turning things around here. And I think that has potentially going to be like a seminal policy piece for the market writ large going forward.
Jane, we had another question pop up. Representative Edwards.
Yes.
Doesn't seem like we can hear anything.
Be muted.
You did a good job with that.
No, but
Okay. Well. Okay, we'll just keep moving on, and Representative Edwards, if you can hold on to your question. Oh, there you go.
I'm back. So my paranoia was somewhat justified. I do have mic problems. I've taken an interest in trying to ensure that what our state board, Prescription Drug Affordability Board, does is additive to all the other efforts taking place. And I see this Medicare negotiation slide, and I'm thinking that this effort is more likely to succeed than much of anything our board is going to be able to achieve just in New Hampshire. Doesn't this, I guess this isn't really for you to answer, Ms. Horvath, but I do think for the board, it with the redundancy report about to come to us, that it does open up the question of what are we doing that's really unique? How are we delivering value? That's all.
Actually, this one I would opine on a bit. So, yeah, I wouldn't call it exactly a redundancy. I think that the opportunity here for states is to take the federal work and this negotiated price, and for instance, use that in your state and local government contracting. Have your PBMs get that price via rebates or otherwise, but all the work's been done, and to take that, or in the case of other states, prescription drug affordability boards that have statewide upper payment limit authority, to make that the statewide in-state cost of the product. That, you know, that is the limit on financial transactions in the state. So, and then everybody gets the benefit of all the work that Medicare has done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
So then the next thing here, the other sort of disruptor in the market is starting this year, now this is really weedy, so I can't see anybody. If you're going to poke your eyes out, let me know in advance, okay? So the Medicaid drug rebate has, since about 2006 till 2024, it was capped at the, let's just call it the list price rate, you know, 100% of the list price of the drug. And the Medicaid rebate has two components to it. So one is Medicaid gets the best price that a manufacturer has offered to any purchaser or payer in the market. That goes to all Medicaid agencies. And then if a manufacturer increases the price of a drug faster than the rate of inflation, I call it the CPI penalty rebate, that also gets tacked on. And it really is the CPI penalty rebate that would drive the size of the rebate, basically, because as we all know, they raise prices a whole lot, a lot of the time. And so some drugs are at the 100% of list price cap. And they've gone there because their liability after that is like, there is no Medicaid liability. So, you know, we're just going to use prices to do whatever else we need to do in the marketplace. And now it's uncapped. And it's like an, oh my God moment for a bunch of products, basically. And so if you follow the formula out, some companies are going to be paying Medicaid to use their products, basically, which is, you know, just sort of a hard thing to even wrap your mind around, but that's where the math would take you if you're not capping the formula. And so some companies are taking their products off the market, relaunching them as authorized generics, and picking up the price, you know, just slapping the same price on it as the product they took off. But now it's a fresh new price, right? So it's not gonna, the rebate doesn't apply anymore. The whole CPI penalty stuff is just vanished. And so now it's just the new launch price, and their rebate liability goes way back down to 23%, basically 23% of the list price. So, some have speculated, and I tend to agree with them, that the big moves that the insulin manufacturers made last year to drop their list prices 60 to 70% had something to do with this Medicaid rebate uncapping. And it was great. I mean, it's to the benefit of everybody, but potentially not to the benefit of Medicaid, which is the problem here. Because, so say Medicaid was getting 100% back on a product, and now they're getting 23% back. And the price on some of these things, not the insulins per se, but on some of these other things is just the same price it was last year, except instead of getting 100% rebate, they're getting a 23% rebate. So that's a market disruptor, and I'm not sure that that's a good one for Medicaid in particular, but we really need to pay attention to that because it could go a couple different ways, I think. So, but for a board, you definitely need eyes on that one.
Representative Merchant?
In regards to the authorized generics, recently GSK did away with the brand name Advair. Has come out with their own generic of Advair. And
Yes.
the market responded very favorably.
I'm sorry, the last part got a little.
The market, if you will, hasn't responded to that transition from a branded product to a generic product very favorably. Is this part of the reason why they made the change? Maybe you don't know, but with Medicaid, what's happening here with the rebates, did GSK make the change based upon this? Or was some other dynamic going on in the market that they took a highly lucrative brand name at a higher price, brought it back to the market on a branded generic at a much lower
Yeah.
price, but it doesn't seem like the market's adopting to it.
So, my guess is yes, that it had something to do with this new Medicaid provision. But that this gets back to the role of PBMs preferring really high-priced products. In another slide, we'll see how companies are bringing products to market now at two list prices. One for PBMs that want the high list price and big rebates, and another for PBMs and insurers that want just the lower priced product and no rebates. And it gets into distribution systems, everything that has been raised up till now in our discussion that you all have brought up. Yeah, it's crazy out there, basically. But yeah, I'm pretty sure Advair has something to do with the Medicaid provision itself.
Thank you.
All right, we can keep going, Jane.
Yep. So, and then here's some other stuff that is also going on that is also gaining ground, I think. So Civica RX was created by a consortium of hospital systems, large hospital systems, and then some foundation funding to actually produce generic products that were often critical products that are often in shortage in the US and are dangerous for patient health in inpatient settings. So Civica RX was created to deal with that. They got the capital from some foundations, but all these large hospital systems put forward capital to create this thing. Right now they're doing contract manufacturing, but I do believe they intend to build their own manufacturing facilities. And then we have Civica Script, which has now started to work with insurers to get these products. They've started to make more than just inpatient hospital products, like the things that you use in an OR and ER and an ICU, to stuff, like your insulins is where they're going, which is clearly an outpatient product. So they're starting to produce very low cost insulins, and now they're working with insurers so that the insurers can get that low cost insulin to their enrollees, which requires a separate distribution system than what we have in the US right now. And then we have Mark Cuban with his, this is wrong, it's not cost plus, it's low cost drugs, which has been a pharmacy set up for just generics, and it mails directly to patients. It's basically cost plus 15%. Basically, that's the pricing for the drugs in the formulary. And now, like J&J has gone and put some of their patented products on this formulary at a very much reduced price, and using his distribution system to get that lower priced product directly to patients, which is very disruptive. It's basically an end run around the PBMs, essentially, because Cuban won't work with PBMs. I mean, his business model is extremely simple, and it's extremely simple to keep the cost of everything down. So people have to pay out of pocket. And Civica Script has now created, I guess it's both Cuban and Civica Script, have PBMs that are not the PBMs that are creating all the havoc in the market, but they're smaller operations and willing to work on this innovation in terms of managing the payment for the product and working to keep the cost of everything, including the administrative costs, low. So anyway, these are very disruptive things. And then this, to the last point, it was raised with about Lilly before. Yeah, they dropped their list price and they created a dedicated distribution channel to get the product to patients who would, I guess, pay cash and get reimbursed from their insurance companies. But the pharmacies that accepted the insulin had to contractually agree to charge no more than, I guess it was $35. So yeah, like nobody likes the PBMs apparently, because they're really working hard to get away from them because they view them as cost drivers. So I don't know that PBMs are terribly worried about it because they're so huge, but it is really fascinating market responses.
Dr. Woodward?
Yeah, with respect to your last bullet, in your opinion, what do you think caused the brand insulin makers to drop their list price and create this dedicated distribution channel? What competition caused that to happen?
So they all did it together. So I don't know that it was, I mean, they did it separately, but they all kind of did the same thing. So they were all like the literature I've seen has estimated that for some of their long, actually, I honestly don't know if it was their long or intermediate acting insulins, but their top insulins that are very expensive, that several years ago, people were literally dying, even though they had insurance, they were dying because they couldn't afford the insulin. So, but they've been rebating basically 60, 70, 80% of the list price back to PBMs and insurers, which is a lot of money. And then patients aren't getting the benefit of any of that. And you have they're getting a lot of really, really, really bad public relations as a result because of the price of the insulin, if you will, even though there's these massive rebates on the back end. So it kind of was not a lot of skin off their noses to just drop the list price, net of the rebate, basically their net, and put it out there at a brand new price, and then try to circumvent the PBMs. And it also, I think, gets them out of a bind with Medicaid now, because they've literally just dropped the price. So, they're going to be paying like 23% of this much lower price as opposed to 180% of a very high price. So yeah, there's two things I would say that came to.
So your list didn't include, your list did not include, and I wonder whether it would, the California state's threat to start their own insulin producing company?
So they may, I think that right now they're going to be using Civica's contract manufacturing facilities. I don't think it's really cost effective. It may be cost effective. I don't think it's cost effective right now for them to go ahead and build a plant if they can use somebody else's plant. But then they also have a problem because California capped, there's a lot of competing stuff going on that is playing a bit of havoc with the economics of things. So the insulin is capped at $35, I guess, for everybody. And then I don't understand all the economic, I'd have to go back and read this stuff. It's not fresh and top of mind, but capping the insulin and making the insulin have wound up being sort of economically not exactly aligned. And I don't believe that they have started any manufacturing, and that law goes back to 2020, I think. So it's a 4-year-old law, and they really haven't been able to, it's pretty hard to move forward on something like that for a state government. Although I will say, most people don't know, but there were 3 states that used to produce their own childhood vaccines, which are biologics, and they started way back like in the 1960s, basically, in Massachusetts, Michigan, and there was one other state in central US, and I forget what it was. But yeah, they produced their own biologics, and then they were mostly privatized starting in the 80s. So states have done it.
Thank you.
So, okay, here we go. Gonna get my little soapbox, stand up, and then talk about the promise of PDABs. But the PDABs are important because they can reset the market competition for drugs in a state, one drug at a time, granted, one drug at a time. But, I think that that's a very thoughtful way to go. You can figure out what all the interactions are, like for a particular drug that is creating affordability problems, people can't access it. Insurers have it on the highest cost sharing tier because they can't manage the costs. Like, what are those products? What's the rebate going on? Like, what's the role of the PBM here? How does this, and can we use rate setting to sort of smooth this out? And for me, rate setting is the kind of thing that is going to improve patient access to the product and improve manufacturer product access to the market, basically. Like you can use rate setting to alleviate some of the cost controls that health insurers do, which are barriers to market entry for a manufacturer. Basically, if you can find that sweet spot, because the point is not to punish manufacturers. The point is that their products, their important products, get to patients one way or the other. And there's just this whole constellation of factors that it just keeps driving the price up and up and up. So I really do see it as creating a lot of transparency in the marketplace around the cost of a product, where consumers know exactly what they can expect to pay when they go into a pharmacy, that there's knowledge, information, and transparency, and improve sales, basically, maybe at a lower cost per unit, but more sales. So that's
A
my
question from,
soapbox.
thank you, Jane. Jane, we have a question from Dr. Aziz.
Thank you, Jane. This is a very informative slide. Can I ask you to maybe take me one layer deeper on that statement? Focus on affordability and not value.
Sure. So, well, two things. One is, I think, at least, I take meds and they're all extremely valuable to me because my life would be very different without them. So I don't know that they're priceless, but there are some drugs that are literally life-saving that are priceless. So that's the value of them, but that is not affordable if, every drug were priced as, because it's priceless value. So I think value is in the domain of the patient, the clinician, and the medical director of the health plan in terms of figuring out coverage and things like that. Because there are drugs that are less value. There are some drugs that are actually dangerous for some people. But value is this different thing, and everything of value is not affordable. And, it has to be affordable for the health plan, the patient, and society. We're getting to the point with $4 million a pop treatments that, we're going to be sacrificing a lot of stuff on as a society to be able to transfer a lot of wealth to manufacturers. And we just have to rethink about it. And I will say, and I can also send you some documentation on this. I was in the industry when they realized we could be talking about value. And then, like, what's an insurer going to say about that? In terms of trying to constrain costs and with respect to our pricing. Pricing used to be very different when we weren't talking about value. So the industry landed on this and sort of changed the game. And now all the industry talks about is the value of their products, because, that's the playing field that works best for them. And there actually is a guy, someone wrote a book about him last year. And again, I'll send Kirk the information so that you can sort of look it up for yourself. But there was a guru, a consultant in the industry, who told them that they could be pricing way higher than they were pricing at the time if they could price on value. Because the industry used to do things like consult with doctors about at what price point would the doctor feel uncomfortable recommending this drug to a person, and they don't do that anymore at all. So it really changed the game. And so I think value doesn't really work for society, to think about drugs in terms of their value versus their affordability. It's just, we're not gonna get anywhere good based on that.
All right, great, thank you. So a few slides, or many slides back, you mentioned things about the orphan drug program and how Humira is part of an orphan drug program, but dependent upon diseases, not the mechanism of action. And in the context of value, thinking about the GLP-1 receptor agonists now that are pretty much becoming ubiquitous, and now we're on the frontier of incurring much cost. Do you think that the value is the same across a continuum of indications for the same drug? More specifically, the utility i.e. the value for semaglutide for treatment of hyperglycemia, risk reduction for major cardiovascular events, and then continuing on to modest to severe overweightedness and obesity. does that drug possess the same value to the patient, to the system? And to the payer?
I'm not qualified to answer that one. I really am not.
No, I'm stemming off of your comment about value won't do much to move the needle.
Yeah, value is not gonna move the needle in terms of making things affordable. And I would say, I think that these are very valuable. Indication by indication, I don't know about these drugs, like, is it more valuable for this indication or that indication? I do not know, but they're very valuable drugs. They're really important products, you know, for a whole bunch of.
Is the value equal across all conditions of interest?
I don't
guess
know.
my-
That would be a clinician. I can't speak to that. I don't know.
If that answer to that question might be different, the value, the cost utility, the value is different across a continuum of conditions, then does that change your statement about value not being an effective cost inhibitor of prescription drugs in our system?
I don't think so, no.
No. Okay, thank you.
One of the things we're gonna have to do, one of the things we might do, I think, as a board is to make sure people can understand the language we're using. So looking at affordability and value, think about the grocery store. You can have 5 grocery stores, shelves full, right? But everything is priced out of reach of most people. So it's an abundance issue, and there's certainly value in eating and getting the food, but it's not affordable. Can't buy it. So it's out there, we can't get it. And I think when we do our messaging, I want to make sure we're talking to people in a way that they can understand, because this is, you know, some of this can border on the esoteric for folks who are just not focused on this stuff.
Right.
Just a thought.
So I do believe this is my last slide, and I thank you for your patience with all of this. But I would say for the New Hampshire PDAB, like, you should think about working with some of these market disruptors for state and local government purchasing and employee benefits. I think that there's some real opportunities out there now that you can leverage. And I think I mentioned before, but thinking about the Medicare negotiated price for state and local government, and just, at least from my view, rate setting can move the market in ways that budget caps and spending targets can't do. And then think about recommending statewide rate setting, particularly for Medicare negotiated price, rather than just state and local government cost containment. And I do believe, yes, we've reached the end.
Well,
Okay, Dr. Aziz?
Thank you so much, Jane. I learned a lot from you. So, question, I've seen some other state PDABs are embarking on affordability reviews for
Yes.
different, that parallel to what this Medicaid negotiations for certain expensive drugs looks like, or can you say anything about that? Because I was interested in learning more about that.
I can actually. So Colorado has done now, I guess, 3 affordability reviews, and they have determined that, that Enbrel, which is an autoimmune disorder product, is not affordable for consumers in Colorado. And so then their next step is trying to figure out a proper upper payment limit for that in the state. They decided that Genvoya is affordable, that it's a bunch of double negatives, is not affordable, not
unaffordable.
anyway, so I'll just say is affordable. It's not the real legal term, but is affordable. And then that Trikafta, this product that's $322,000 a year, is affordable because Vertex provides up to $100,000 in patient assistance every year. So they have done that. What is interesting to me is that Enbrel is on the Medicare negotiation list. So, and one of the other products that they chose to review this year is also on the Medicare negotiation list. And I think there is a strong possibility that they won't really be able to set their own upper payment limit on a drug for which Medicare has set a maximum fair price. I think Medicare preemption is gonna make that very difficult to do, basically. So I think they're gonna have to, at some point, for Enbrel, if they want to do something, adopt the Medicare fair price. And then Oregon has done affordability reviews for several products and has decided that Humalog, which is an insulin, is not affordable for the patients. And it was a really good discussion that they had about like the market and who pays what and how and things like that. So, but they're not setting an upper payment limit. They don't have authority to do that now. Their next step is to report back to the legislature on their analysis of things and then their recommendations about what to do.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
No, it's been great.
Excellent.
It's like-
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Excellent.
thank you for your time. So, and I'll get that stuff to Kurt that I promised. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane.
Well, yes, a lot to digest.
So with the remaining, I guess, 15 minutes, I guess for everyone, you know, does this inform how you're thinking about how we approach the rest of the year? Did this bring anything to light? You know, I think it's good to start thinking about what the market we're up against, how it's functioning, how it's working by different products, how the market's evolving at the federal and state level. And I think Jane very eloquently put all that together in one presentation. Is there more information you'd like? Just
I mean, I would,
Yeah.
I would, I think that, and this is not to put a stick in our mud, right? But this concept of affordability and relative to the line of inquiry that I just posed. And emerging now more and more are these off-label uses and then multiple indications for the same drug. She brought up a problem with Humira. But as we're seeing more and more of that, how can we hold constant this concept of value or utility for the same drug across multiple indications, knowing when and use the word affordability at the same time, that same drug, you know, that we might be able to afford to save our lives may not be that affordable for something with lower utility like weight loss. And it's not to pose a question that's, you know, we're not able to answer or to go into a whole realm of study that we don't really do in our nation, cost utility for drugs. But that's an elephant in this room that we have, you know, great innovations in drugs that are helping with lots of autoimmune conditions. There are many autoimmune conditions and the same drug can be used for that, but it has different value. And some people can afford to take them with the same cost, but then for some diseases that are more threatening, you can't afford not to take them. So how do we reconcile that strange dichotomy that is only getting bigger and bigger? And I put that out there not to say, you know, we should think about the A in our name, but I would like to hear more from ICER and about, you know, about their work with cost utility of drugs, so we can understand truly the value of drugs. And we look at insulin, I mean, they're in the context of diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2, diabetic type 1 cannot live without insulin. Diabetes type 2, that may be a matter of debate, yet they're the same cost. Moreover, the population prevalence of diabetes type 2 who are on insulin is a major cost driver for the drug. And you can't dissociate those two, holding constant utility. It's an aberration that needs to be reconciled. And it's not to say that it's within the statutory authority of this board, because as it stands now, it's not, but it is an important area of interest. And I think if we're to help our population get better access to important drugs that help their health, we should make that under our purview to look at that. And it's not easily done. We don't have an existing really equitable framework in our nation to do that, but we have a very respectable organization 60 miles to our south who's done a lot of work on that. I
Mhm.
know many of us are interested. I would love to see
Yeah,
what they would say about that in the context of, you know, doing something good, something important for our citizens. And
Absolutely.
maybe it's innovative and scary and uncomfortable for us, but I want to advance my understanding about that.
Yeah.
I want my colleagues here who I know aim to do good work to learn more about that too.
okay,
Okay.
that's great. And I, I would say ICER has worked with New York on their Medicaid drug cap program. And so when they're assessing various drugs that may pierce that cap, they have worked with ICER to kind of develop a framework for then either recommending enhanced rebates, and this is all within Medicaid, right? So it's not a one-for-one comparison, but they can also share how they've worked with certain states to help inform their work. Because I think to Jane's point too, we could talk about value to the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like at some point, the value conversation has to stop and you have to look at how it's impacting your budget at the same time. So I think there are states that have gone down this road that we had brought up, like Colorado, Oregon, Maryland. How are they thinking about cost utility, or how are they assessing the affordability continuum from the patient to the payer to the pharmacy? And are they using ICER or other types of reports to inform their recommendations, which, you know, for better or worse, it seems like if we have a spending target, if we're doing UPLs, whatever it may be, we will need to think about exactly those types of choices. How would we incorporate value into our discussions or not? How do we talk about affordability or not? And so I think you're bringing up a good point, like we should get similar examples in front of the board.
Yeah, it scares me to think about setting a spending target without considering utility, because by definition and by economic law,
Mhm.
when we assess who the positive and negative externalities, then those people who for which that drug holds the highest utility, i.e. those people who need it the most, will be harmed the most.
Mhm.
And that would be an unintended consequence.
Right.
Of a mispointed kind of approach, yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
It's a good segue actually into number 5. Is next month is for us to begin to think about what is our fundamental mission. We talk about affordability to whom? Because in a statute, it really talks more about the payer than it does the patient. But at that point in time, I think we need to start having a healthy conversation amongst all of us. Is what's the true mission of this board? And back to what you're talking about, Dr. Is makes a lot of sense. But I think we have to start weaving this together and come up with some sort of agreed upon consensus driven mission that we all support. Because once that's been developed, it goes back to, again, the redundancy report. Because we talk about the functionality between the insurance department and this board, until we have clear mission between the two, it's hard to have, I think, a good healthy conversation about redundancy, which is back to the same we talked about earlier. So that's one of the things I wanted you folks to think about is in the March meeting, Antonio
Gotcha.
will be here to help frame that up for us and talk about affordability and that whole fundamental mission that we're hopefully all wrestling with.
Yeah.
So, and that it goes back in the same thing, utility. There's so many variables that come into play, but we need to put them on the table. Have a healthy discussion about them and ultimately come up with some sort of consensus.
Representative Edwards?
Yeah, I agree with everything that the chairman just said. I would like to supplement it a little bit, that as we come to agree more and more on the details of what our mission is, I think it would also be helpful, and I've done this in a project management world, is to develop a parallel list of things that are outside our scope, that are very close to what our mission is, but where we decide that we need to start drawing a line between what we do and what we know we don't do. And maybe some of that is just real obvious, but I think there may be some nuances there that we ought to flesh out. So that's my thought.
Representative Edwards, it's Todd Fahey. Would you consider a third bucket to think about those things that are in, those things that are out, and those things that maybe should be in or maybe should be out?
I think to answer your question, I think that's basically implied when you get the distinction and the fact that this is a permanent board, and the board will want to, you know, like any government entity, it's going to want to grow and do more. And maybe we'll find that we need to do more in order to actually get the mission done. But I think in the near term, the issue is just really focused on the two buckets, and then trying to get some work done to figure out what may want to go into the third bucket you're referring to. That's how I view it.
I think it's, again, it's gonna be hopefully a healthy discussion in March, to tee it up. At the same time, I think back to the board, having that discussion about fundamental mission of the board, which I think will go back into the next discussion. That meeting is gonna be about redundancy, because if we don't have, my opinion, clear objective, what we're trying to accomplish, it's hard to understand where the redundancy is. There's data redundancy, but that's not the mission redundancy I'm trying to get to. So in saying that, next month, I'm gonna ask the board if we can we either go later, because it's gonna be a dynamic, I'm sure, healthy discussion. I'm trying to think, either start early or go later. It's gonna be a. So what's the preference of the board? Do you want to start at 9:30 and go until 12:30? Start at 9 and go to 12? I think it's gonna be more of a 3-hour conversation. Representative Edwards?
Yeah, thank you. That's related to the other question I came into this morning on, which is there a way, and I think there is, but what is the way in which a few of us could get together and have deeper discussions on this without worrying about a quorum in 91A? There's just so much material and so many discussions we might have. I don't know that we can do it in a 2-hour meeting once a month.
I concur, and I think I'll look to the back of the room to our illustrious attorney, Rob Berry, to maybe talk to the Attorney General if there's any way to accomplish that.
Yeah, I'll be working on,
Okay.
getting a sense
Yeah.
of what the rules are with that.
So more to follow, Representative Edwards.
All right, thanks. And anything we do in a working group that looks like it's a good idea, obviously we would bring that to the full board and get it on the public record. I'm not proposing we do anything that isn't transparent. I'm just thinking we need a way to get more work done faster.
I totally 100% agree. I would also like to know if we could even do it via Zoom versus being in person, but again, it's up to the Attorney General in 91A and what we can and cannot do. So thank you for bringing that up, because it's definitely something we should be thinking about, is maybe subcommittees or subgroups working on different parts of it and then coming back together as a full board to weave it together. Okay, future meetings, we have, I think it's March 25th.
Yep.
March 25th. Again, is the preference to go from 9 o'clock until 12 or 9:30 to 12:30?
I like 9:30 to 12:30.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, 9:30 to 12:30?
I concur. On the future scheduling, could we go ahead and try to put the long-term schedule all the way through 2024? Just, you know, the Governor's Commission on Alcohol and Drug Abuse publishes a year at a time.
It's the fourth Monday of each month. Does that help?
It does. I guess I just like seeing lists of dates, but I can create my own.
Sure. We'll get something out to the board members with dates as well.
I'm due to be away next month. I'll try to dial in, but I can't promise it.
Okay.
If it's imperative, I will. It sounds like it could be
It's
important.
gonna be an important one. Yeah, it's gonna be perfect. In regards to public comments, do we have any public comments from people? Nope. Anyone on the Zoom that wants to chime in? Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to make a public comment? Going once, going twice, gone. Outside of that, I will also adjourn the meeting at, what's wrong, at 11:26. So thank you.
Thank you. All
Hey,
right, thank you.
Thank you. From a Zoom perspective, I think you ran this really well. I felt like I was fully able to participate. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, and good luck with your time out in Arizona, by the way.
Yeah, this is part of it. It's been great fun.
You have a good time, Representative.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
All right, thank
Jason,
you.
Jason.